"You sick bastard, they're just babies!" Sergeant Cole Brennan's voice cracked through the frigid morning air like a whip. He had barely jumped from the rusting pickup when he saw them. 3 German shepherd puppies, trembling, whimpering, tied by a fraying rope to one of the outermost train rails. Their small bodies were coated in grime and dew, and their paws scraped frantically at the wooden ties as a distant rumble grew louder. The man he was shouting at didn't even flinch. He was already walking away, disappearing behind the tree line like he hadn't just committed something monstrous. Cole didn't have time to chase him. Not when a train horn blared from beyond the bend. The ground vibrated beneath his boots. The track wasn't silent anymore. For a second, he froze, not because of fear, but because the image shattered him. These weren't strays. They were young, maybe 6 weeks old at most, collars still too big for their necks. One was lying down completely, giving up, and the train was close. Cole lunged forward, his knees slamming into the gravel as he reached for the rope with trembling hands. It was double-knotted and slick with oil. One of the pups growled weakly, more from terror than threat. The sound of metal grinding against the tracks behind him was deafening now. "Come on," Cole muttered under his breath, biting down on panic as he yanked at the knot. The first one came loose. He grabbed the pup and tossed him to the side of the embankment. The second, his leash was tighter, almost embedded into the wood. His paws slipped, fingers bleeding. The metal rail under his body burned with oncoming heat. Then he heard it, the scream of brakes, the screech of steel, and then silence. Just not the kind that meant peace. It meant the train had seen him. The engineer had pulled emergency brakes, but not in time. With a final wrench, Cole freed the second and swept him up in his arms, throwing himself off the tracks just as the thunder of iron ripped through where he'd been seconds before. His back hit the earth. The world spun. His shoulder cracked against a stone. Pain flared, but the pup in his arms was safe. The third puppy had rolled down the hill and now lay in the weeds, whimpering but alive. Cole coughed hard, the gravel, scratching his throat as the monstrous train finally roared past, shaking the trees in its wake. He couldn't hear much beyond the blood thumping in his ears and the pups crying near him, but he was breathing. They were breathing. He lay there a moment longer, unsure if he wanted to vomit or cry. Then he looked down. The second puppy, the one he had cradled, was licking his scraped hand. That was when his hands started shaking for a different reason. He hadn't come here for this. He was just supposed to be driving through, heading back to base after a weekend leave. But when he saw that man dragging something toward the tracks, he felt something inside snap, something old and buried. He didn't even think. He just stopped the truck and ran. Now he sat in the dirt, holding 3 tiny lives that had been inches from being destroyed, wondering how far someone had to fall to think this was okay, to tie babies to a track and walk away. Cole gathered them close, one by one, wrapping them in the soft blanket from his back seat. He looked down the tracks, jaw clenched. The man who did this would be long gone, but the damage could have been permanent. Not today, not on his watch. He didn't know yet where he'd take them. A vet? A shelter? He had no plan, just instinct. But what he couldn't explain was this. Something about the way one of those pups stared at him, directly, without blinking, without flinching, made him feel like he hadn't saved them. It felt like they had saved him, and that scared him more than the train ever could. Cole sat on the edge of the embankment, holding the trembling puppy against his chest as the train disappeared down the track, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the scent of scorched steel. His heart hadn't slowed yet. It pounded against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The 2 other pups were tucked safely in the old blanket from his truck, whimpering quietly, shivering in shock. But they were alive. All of them were alive. He let his eyes close for a moment, breathing through the pain in his shoulder and the raw burn in his scraped palms. His military training had taught him to handle chaos, to charge into the storm without hesitation. But this wasn't a battlefield, and yet somehow it felt heavier than any mission he'd run. These weren't enemy combatants. These were 3 innocent lives who never even had a chance to fight back. He stood slowly, one arm holding the pup tight, while the other scooped up the blanket with the others. Blood from his hand had seeped into the edge of the fabric, but he didn't care. He loaded them gently into the back seat of his pickup, laying them on the softest section of the bench, then shut the door with care. It wasn't until he sat behind the wheel and looked into the rearview mirror that something inside him cracked. The smallest pup, the one he'd pulled from under the track, was staring at him again, Not just with fear, but with trust. Complete, unflinching trust. Cole swallowed hard. He hadn't seen a gaze like that since his canine partner, Ranger, died in his arms 2 years ago during a deployment gone wrong. He never spoke about that day. Never told anyone about the guilt, the nightmares, the silent howl that lived in his chest every time he looked at a German shepherd. But this was like Ranger had sent him a message through time. A second chance. He shook the thought off and started the engine. The closest vet clinic was 20 minutes away, in the next town over. He called ahead, voice tight, explaining what he found. The receptionist didn't ask many questions, just told him to come straight in. The urgency in his voice must have said enough. When he arrived, the staff was waiting outside with towels and emergency kits. They moved fast, lifting the pups gently, checking breathing, vitals, their limbs. One had bruised ribs, another had a gash on its hind leg. But miraculously, they'd survive. Cole sat in the waiting room, his shirt torn, face streaked with dried sweat and road dust. The nurse returned after a while, her expression soft. "They'll be okay," she said. "They're shaken, but strong. Lucky, too." "Not lucky," he replied quietly. "Just late by a few seconds, and it would have been a very different story." The nurse tilted her head. "You saved them." He looked down. "I don't know if I saved them, or if they saved me." He didn't elaborate, but she didn't press. She simply nodded and left him alone. Over the next hour, Cole learned the truth bit by bit. The rope used to tie the pups had been doused in motor oil, possibly to ensure slippage or discomfort. It was intentional, not a neglect case. This was cruelty, and there was no microchip, no tags, just babies dumped like trash in the worst possible place. That night, Cole stayed with them. The clinic offered to keep them for observation, but he couldn't walk away, not after what he'd seen. He ended up on the floor beside their crate, nodding off every now and then, one hand always resting near them. And every time he opened his eyes, one of the pups, always the same one, would be watching him. In the morning, the vet gave him a choice. The pups could be sent to a rescue group, but given how young they were and the trauma they'd endured, it was better if they went somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, somewhere with someone they could learn to trust again. Cole didn't even hesitate. "They're coming home with me," the vet smiled. "All three?" "All three," he said, voice firm. "I don't split up soldiers." He brought them home to his small cabin near the woods, where the silence was peaceful and the yard wide open. He built them a soft sleeping space near the fireplace, fed them by hand, sat with them through their whimpers and fear-driven flinches. Slowly, day by day, they started to wag their tails. They followed him, cried when he left the room, played with each other in bursts of clumsy joy. The house wasn't quiet anymore. Cole named them Atlas, Sky, and Echo. But the smallest one, the one with the gash on his leg and the gaze that went right through Cole's soul, never left his side. Echo would sit by the door when Cole showered, lay by his boots when he read, press his forehead against Cole's hand at night like he needed to remind himself they were real, that they were safe. And Cole? He stopped dreaming of blood and desert, wind, stopped hearing Ranger's last breath in the dead of night. Sometimes when Echo curled against his chest and sighed, Cole would whisper something no one else could hear. "You did save me." And deep down, he knew it was true. Cole hadn't planned to take a week off. But after what happened on those tracks, he couldn't focus on anything else. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the glint of metal, the blur of the oncoming train, and the tiny, helpless faces looking up at him like he was the only thing standing between them and death. He could still feel the scorch of adrenaline in his chest. Echo's terrified whimper hadn't left his ears. He spent the next few days nursing the pups at home. Atlas was the strongest of the three, always the first to eat, the first to explore, the first to bark at the wind. Sky, with her soft gray fur and uncertain steps, needed reassurance every hour. Echo, though, he was different. He wasn't just recovering. He was watching, processing, bonding. Cole sat with them on the porch, watching the sun fall below the tree line, a mug of coffee untouched in his hand. He found himself talking to them more than he cared to admit, telling them things no one else knew, like how after Ranger died in that roadside blast, Cole had refused to take on another K9 partner. They'd offered, he'd declined, said he was done, said no bond was worth breaking twice, but now, this runt who shouldn't have made it. He had cracked open something Cole thought he'd buried years ago. On the fourth morning, a knock came at the door. Cole opened it to find Deputy Marla Jensen standing there, sunglasses tucked in her vest pocket, a file under one arm. "You weren't exactly easy to find," she said with a half-smile. "I wasn't hiding," he replied. "Just didn't want to be found." "I figured," she said. "Mind if I come in?" He stepped aside, and she walked in, her boots clacking against the hardwood. She spotted the pups immediately and knelt down. Sky licked her fingers. Atlas barked. Echo stayed behind Cole's heel. Marla's smile faded. "I ran the rope through the lab, traced it to a known junkyard on the edge of Lexington. Belongs to a man named Frankie Dalton. Been on our radar for a while, but never caught anything that would stick." Cole's jaw clenched. "And now? Well, tying animals to active train tracks might finally do it," she said. "Especially if we can prove he dumped them there." Cole's voice was flat. "Then let's prove it." But Marla hesitated. "We need someone who found them to testify. Maybe even go back to the site. There's a chance the cameras from the nearby crossing picked something up, but we don't know for sure yet." He nodded slowly. "I'll do it, but I'm not leaving them. They'll be safe at the vet." "No," Cole cut her off. "They stay with me." Marla met his eyes and didn't argue. That afternoon, Cole and Marla drove back to the site. The tracks were quiet now, the air unsettlingly peaceful compared to the chaos he remembered. Cole stood near the spot, every detail still burned into his memory, where the rope had been anchored, the spot his knees had slammed into gravel, the scorched edge of the metal where the train had screamed past. Marla took photos. He gave his statement. Then something strange happened. As they were leaving, a boy on a bike rode by, slowing as he passed. "You looking for the puppies?" the kid asked casually. Marla raised a brow. "You saw something?" The boy shrugged. "Not the pups. Just saw that guy who always yells at us near the junkyard. He had a sack in his hand last week. It was leaking." Cole's stomach turned. "Leaking?" Marla pressed. "Yeah, like black stuff. Oil, I think. And he was cussing like crazy. Threw it in the truck and sped off." Marla and Cole exchanged a glance. That was enough. Back at the sheriff's office, Marla filed a report with the new statement and started the process. Cole returned. Home. Exhausted but clear-headed. For the first time, it felt like justice might actually be possible. That night, while the pups slept curled up together in a blanket, Echo stirred and wandered toward Cole, who was half asleep on the couch. The tiny shepherd climbed up, pawed at his arm, then curled up against his chest without a sound. Cole didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on the pup's small back. He had saved them, but he hadn't realized. Until now, they had come to save him too. Cole didn't sleep that night, not deeply. Every time his eyes closed, the sound of the train horns returned, echoing through his chest like a warning. He kept waking up to check the pups, especially Echo, who had refused to sleep unless tucked between Cole's boots. At one point, around 3 a.m., Cole found himself just sitting on the porch, Echo curled up beside him, both of them watching the stars in silence. By morning, things shifted. News had spread. A local blog had somehow gotten wind of the rescue, and by noon, a TV crew stood outside Cole's property gate. He didn't speak to them, but Marla did. And when she explained what he had done, how he had risked his life for 3 discarded puppies, public attention turned fast. That afternoon, Cole got a call from an unfamiliar number. When he answered, the voice on the other end was sharp, almost irritated. "This is Major Alan Brody, head of the military's K-9 division. I'd like to meet you." Cole paused. "Why? I saw what you did. I know what you walked away from after Ranger, but maybe it's time you came back." "I'm not looking for work," Cole muttered. "I'm not offering a job," Brody replied. "I'm offering closure, for you and for them." Cole didn't reply. He hung up after a long silence. Later that evening, Marla dropped by again. She had more than just updates this time. In her hand was a worn photo, blurry, taken from a gas station security camera, but it was enough. The same old pickup from the junkyard, rope sticking out of the bed, black streaks down the side. "Frankie Dalton, caught in motion. We've got him," she said. "He'll be in court next month. But there's something else." She looked uneasy. "What is it?" "One of the shelter board members is trying to claim the puppies. Technically. And since they're untagged and you're not a licensed foster, they can push for it." Cole didn't speak, just stared at her. "They want to separate them," she added quietly. "Different homes." Cole stood up, fists clenched. "They won't survive that, not Echo. Not after what they've been through. I'm fighting it, she said. But you need to make a choice. If you want to keep them, you're going to have to step forward, publicly. The silence stretched long. Cole had spent years avoiding cameras, people, and questions. He didn't want fame, didn't want recognition. But this wasn't about him. It was about 3 fragile lives that had barely escaped death. The next morning, he stood in front of the courthouse steps, Marla at his side, the pups nestled in a soft crate nearby. Dozens of people gathered, phones up, reporters calling out. Cole didn't speak long, just enough. I didn't rescue them for attention. I rescued them because they deserved to be rescued. They are not property. They're not garbage. They're survivors. And they're staying together. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, raw, and enough to move people. By evening, petitions were circulating. Donations flooded the local shelter. And when the board met again, the vote was unanimous. The puppies, Atlas, Sky, and Echo, would stay under Cole's guardianship. But what Cole hadn't expected was what happened next. 2 days later, he received a letter, not an email, a letter, stamped from Fort Bragg. Inside was a handwritten note from Major Brody. At the bottom, a simple line, "Your service didn't end when you left. It just changed. If you ever decide to return, there's a pup here who reminds me a lot of Echo." Cole read the note 3 times before tucking it into his coat pocket. He looked over at the trio of German shepherds now curled in the living room, growing stronger by the day. He wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the future. He was ready to face it, with them. The sun had barely risen when Cole loaded the 3 pups into the back of his old Jeep. Echo rested her head on his shoulder from the passenger seat, while Atlas and Sky huddled quietly in the crate, their eyes blinking at the morning light. Today wasn't about courtrooms or reporters. Today was about closure and healing. They were headed to Fort Bragg. Cole hadn't told anyone, not Marla, not the shelter board, not even the few neighbors who now nodded at him with newfound respect. He just needed to see something through, something unfinished. When he arrived at the base, the guards at the gate didn't ask questions. One recognized him from the news and simply pointed. "K9 unit's been expecting you." Major Brody stood near the training field, arms crossed, watching a young German shepherd maneuver through an obstacle course with remarkable precision. But when he turned and saw Echo peering from Cole's side, something shifted in his expression. "She's the one, isn't she?" Brody asked. Cole nodded. "She's got fire." Brody walked over slowly, kneeling in front of Echo. She didn't flinch, didn't bark, just looked at him, calm and steady. Brody reached out a hand and she placed her paw in it, like it was something she'd done 100 times before. "You said you had another one," Cole said quietly. Brody stood, nodding toward the kennels. "Come." Inside, Cole met Jasper, a young silver-eyed shepherd with a scar across his nose and too much fear in his bones. He had been labeled untrainable, defensive, hopeless. But the way his ears perked up when Echo came near told a different story. She approached him gently, nose to nose, and something unspoken passed between them. Cole saw it. The connection. The recognition. Trauma speaking a language only survivors knew. Brody sighed. "We were going to release him. No handler could reach him, but Echo just did." Cole was silent for a long time. He looked back at Atlas and Sky waiting by the door, and then at Echo, who now sat beside Jasper like a sentinel. Something inside him loosened, a weight he hadn't realized was still there. "Let me work with him," Cole said. "Not as a soldier, as someone who understands." Brody didn't hesitate. "Then he's yours." Weeks passed, then months. The pups grew stronger, bolder. Jasper transformed, not under pressure or commands, but through companionship and patience. Cole built them a training area out behind his house, not for combat, but for confidence, for trust. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from a teenage girl in Nebraska. She'd read about Cole and the dogs, and how Echo had been tied to tracks but now helped others heal. The girl had anxiety. She couldn't speak in school, but now she carried a picture of Echo in her notebook, and she wanted to meet her someday. Cole read that letter sitting under the old oak tree behind his cabin, all 4 shepherds at his feet. He didn't cry, but he smiled, and in that moment, he realized something deeply true. Sometimes, the ones who are discarded, the ones who are broken, become the very reason someone else chooses to keep going. They become the proof that survival is not just about making it through, but about becoming something stronger on the other side. That night, as the stars rose above the ridge and the breeze carried the sound of quiet breaths and gentle paws, across the grass, Cole leaned back and whispered words meant only for the wind. You were never just pups. You were warriors, and you saved me more than I saved you. And in the quiet that followed, it felt like the whole world nodded back.